You're listening to Creatives Crushing Anxiety, the podcast for online business creatives looking to minimize their anxiety and maximize their productivity through systems organization and time management. I'm your host, Dia Darling. Let's do this. Hey guys, welcome to this episode of Creatives Crushing Anxiety. And today we're going to talk about how your attachment style affects your business. Now, to give a little bit of backstory, a couple of years ago, my therapist suggested that I read this book called Attached, which I will link in the show notes. Now, Attached is all about the attachment styles that we develop growing up. And not a therapist, totally recommend you read the book, but since I've read this book and I've reread it a few times, I am just so aware of when my attachment style is showing. And I often will be in situations with people where I think, oh, they must be a this. Now, I don't recommend going around diagnosing people being like, well, that's because you're an anxious avoidant. But when you are familiar with these types, you can know how to engage with them. And you may not be on the nose. You may feel pretty confident that someone is anxious or an avoidant, and they may actually be insecure, but it's just how they interact with you. So what's really important as far as listening to this episode is to know that I am not an expert. I'm sharing my own personal opinion and experience with this work. So I recommend you read the book, but just to give you an overview. So basically there are three core attachment styles: secure, anxious, and avoidant. Or if you want to put them in two categories, they're secure and insecure, and anxious and avoidant fall underneath the insecure. Now, that may sound negative, but it is not. Basically, what happens is the way that we engage with our parents or our caretakers when we're developing and growing up is how we reflect to the world. So if we had a parent that maybe was absent or inconsistent, we may find that we're anxious, and part of us always wants approval or connection or security. So what's ironic about the anxious attachment style is that they crave security, even though they're not a secure attachment style, because they maybe didn't have it in other areas growing up. Now, the really good news about attachment styles is that these can grow and change, and it's through experiences that provide you with that security. The avoidant is the person who, doesn't necessarily like to be held down. Now, typically attachment style is talked about in the sense of romantic relationships, but it really pops up in every single area of your life. So I want to read a little bit of some notes that I wrote about the different attachment styles. So anxious people are often preoccupied with their relationships and tend to worry about their partner's ability to love them back. So in business, this may look like they're always thinking about the worst case scenario, like a client won't like the work that they provide, or a client may fire them. A client may, not really like them. So there's always a lot of nervousness and fear around that relationship, even though it's a professional one and not a personal or romantic one. Avoidant people equate intimacy with loss of independence and constantly try to minimize closeness. Now, as someone who has been around a lot of business owners, I do see the avoidant attachment style a lot. And what that kind of looks like is they are very independent. They are very set in their ways, and they can sometimes they don't necessarily do well with feedback or rules because they want to maintain that sense of control. Secure people feel comfortable with intimacy and are usually warm and loving. The secure people are the ones who had a wonderful relationship with their parents, who felt like they had independence, but they also had support. They knew they could jump and that there would be a net to support them. So in business, this looks like they are very good at communicating their needs, their desires. They show up and they believe in their ability to get done what needs to be done. Now, on the other side of that, they are also very open to feedback because they don't take it personally. They are the person who, if someone has a critique, they're receptive to it as a way to, get better at what they're doing, and they don't take it as a personal attack. Now, I won't make you guess which style I am. I am actually a common hybrid. I am the anxious avoidant, which means I crave and fear intimacy. Yeah, I'm a real treat. But I wanted to make this video so that we could talk about some of the attachment styles, and also I wanted to highlight some of the good things. So let's start with anxious. This is the person who is always sure a client will fire them or no one will book with them. Now, this attachment style cock blocks the shit out of your business. And the reason is because like clients sense that energy, that anxiousness, like, please sign, please sign. Oh, I hope they sign. Oh, I hope they sign. They're not going to sign. Oh my God, I hope they sign. Like, and it may not feel that extreme to you, but that energy, even if it's your internal dialogue, that energy comes across, and it can be really, really toxic and really prevent people from wanting to do business with them. They also are typically the type of people who, have trouble sleeping because they're always thinking about what they could have done better or replaying conversations in their head. They spend way too much time worrying about things that haven't happened, as well as making big things out of small things. Now, on the plus side of that, anxious people tend to be really, really good at managing others, ironically, because first of all, that's a sense of control and power, because, if you're managing people, then they can't fire you. But because they are so emotionally heightened and aware of all the things going on at all the times, they can read other people really well. So there is some benefits to being anxious. Now, the next thing is the avoidant. And again, like, they are the person who wants to do their own thing. They are not an adapter. So a lot of times when they come into a client's business or a coach, or they're working with a coach, or they're in a program, they experience this resistance because they don't want to lose that sense of control. Like, a lot of times their reaction to feedback is, well, I'm going to do it my way. And this is where my avoidant comes in, when I'm very much like, okay, I heard you, but so this is very much a double-edged sword, because the rebel way about them, and the making things work their way and doing things their way, the way that they want, has probably gotten them to where they are. And not because they're like dismissive or stuck on other people, but because they are true to themselves. But they can easily alienate people with the avoidant attachment style, because they don't want to get too close. They don't want to depend on anyone. They don't want anyone necessarily depending on them. So they can leave clients and team members feeling unsupported or frustrated, because they're like, okay, I hired you to do this, but obviously you need to do it the way that I want you to do it, because it's my business. You're an independent contractor, but it's my business. And there's like a little bit of a clash. So you have to be really careful with that, because while people often say the avoidant is not an emotional person, they can really, really like tune into those emotions and take things personally. And while they may not react from a place of fear, like, oh, well, they're going to fire me, they may react more from an emotion of, can't think of the word I want to use, going to be totally honest. They may react from an emotion of like needing to protect themselves, or rejection even, or like someone's trying to control them. So it's very interesting to me that there are the anxious, and then there's the avoidant, and then there's the anxious avoidance, because if you can't tell just from my descriptions of them, there is a lot of crossover, but it's more about how they react to the emotions that they have, that comes up for both types. Now, the secure person, obviously, you're a dream. Everybody wants to work with you. You're confident in your thoughts and the value that you bring to the table, but you aren't threatened by like new ideas or new suggestions. One thing that I will say to the secures that could potentially be a downside is, because they don't have these feelings or thoughts or processes that the anxious and avoidance have, they may not be as attuned to realizing when things are coming up for their anxious and avoidance clients or coworkers. So I think it's really important for secure people to be sure that what may feel instilled in them and that they're confident with, other people may not feel that. So it's really important to try to meet people where they're at. And I don't mean, change who you are, but to be aware, like to look for patterns. If you work with someone who is anxious and they always seem unsure in themselves, to pump them up and let them know, like, okay, no, this is really good. Like, this is wonderful. You're doing a great job. Because attachment styles are not set in stone. They grow and it change as we have new experiences that provide us with the security that we need. And like, you have an attachment style, but we do react in different ways. And that's why there's the anxious avoidant, because sometimes we'll be like, love me, love me, love me. But then we'll be like, whoa, calm down with all the love. So it's very, very tricky, but it's so interesting to me. And I just wanted to do an episode where we talked about what that looks like in business and invite you all to read this book, whether you want to read it and think about it from a business point of view, whether you're wondering why your relationships don't work out or why you keep picking certain types of partners. And I will say this, because when I read this book, I realized that I had a tendency to pick avoidant partners. And that was my anxious showing, because even though you would think, oh no, I want someone secure, my upbringing with my father, and I don't usually get this personal, was he was a avoidant person. So that was like what I was trying to replace that need, and thinking if I could, get an avoidant person to be secure towards me and with me, then I would like heal that wound. And it obviously was not a conscious thought. Thank you, years of therapy. Thank you, Dr. Z, for always being there. But yeah, so please go read the book. I would love to hear your thoughts and your comments. And then also your insights if you're familiar with the attachment types. And if you aren't and you read the book, like which one came up for you and how that felt for you to actually like discover this about yourself, and what made sense and what maybe didn't make sense, or what you thought was complete BS. So thank you so much for joining me for this episode, and I will catch you next time. You're listening to Creatives Crushing Anxiety, the podcast for online business creatives looking to minimize their anxiety and maximize their productivity through systems organization and time management. I'm your host, Dia Darling. Let's do this.